Here we have yet another coat that has buttons falling off of it. Their coats, they do that. They have heavy fabric, so they get a little bit more wear and tear, especially in shows where there's a lot of quick changes or coats are being thrown right or left. They're durable, but, thread only has so much of a lifespan. This is my personal coat, so it really has no excuses, except that it was thrifted and who knows what it went through in its past life. So trimming off the excess, putting this aside for a moment. One thing to note about this particular coat is that underneath it has a reinforcement button. And they're sewn as one piece together. And I'll show you how to put that on too. It's basically just matching up the 4 holes and sewing it just like normal. So first of all, we'll start with our tied needle and thread. And put it right up through where the original button stitching is, through all the layers. Take the button and note where the other buttons are oriented. They're not particularly oriented. A lot of times they'll be, the buttons or the holes will be straight up and down parallel with the edge of the coat. So we're going to attempt to do a relatively similar thing. So put that aligning with where the original stitching holes are. Make a point down through all the layers, and that will give us the orientation. That'll lock in our orientation. Now come back underneath, grab your reinforcement button, find its second hole, let's do that one, and come up. It'll take a few tries, and that's okay. If you need to, you can look at where the threading was originated and come up right through there. This coat fabric is quite heavy. It's a raincoat, so it needs to be. And lay the 2 sides together. All right, we'll repeat that process a couple of times, double checking underneath to make sure that we're hitting the right spots. And one thing to note is not to pull it down too tightly. Give it a little bit of wiggle room. That way, when we put in the shank later on, it's going to be easier and won't pull the thread in a strange manner. So next up, to switch the sides, we just hop over one here. The look on the back doesn't matter too much unless you're making a couture something or another, which, theater we're not usually doing. Nobody's going to see the inside, so it doesn't matter if it's just that tiny bit a little messy. I had a little extra loop there that I made sure to check before I locked down, so all the threads lay nice and flat. So now that I have all the stitching that I want, instead of going down through this hole all the way through, I'm going to just go down through the buttonhole and come out between the layers if I can. Sometimes it's a little bit tough to make. There we go. Try not to break your needle while you're doing that. And so I'm between the front face of the fabric and the button, and I'm going to put in a shank. And what a shank does is it lets the button sit a little bit up off the fabric surface, and so when it goes through the buttonhole with all of the buttonhole layers, it doesn't pull or pucker. It just sits nicely on top. 4, 5, maybe about 6. So there's just that little bit of lift between the button and the fabric. So once I've wound it 6 times around, I'll sneak between 2 of the layers, picking up some of the shank. And tie off just like we normally do. Have to give it some guidance. Oh dear. But thankfully, I finished that before I broke the thread. This is why you don't pull too tight. Here I am, being kind of a hasty sewer, because I was raised in theater, to sew theater style, and sometimes that's just a little quick and dirty. But we have a nice secure button now. It's going to stay for hopefully years to come.